2nd meeting minutes. Do you have any changes, Councilmember Coombs? I'm sorry, I don't know if it's my end or I just wasn't able to hear what you said, Councilmember Coombs.
I said I do not see any changes.
Okay, great. Neither do I. So meeting minutes are approved. And we can jump into any announcements if folks have any. All right, doesn't look like there are any announcements, and we will go to our first agenda item, which is the ARPA allocations presentation. And who is our staff presenter on this item?
Alicia Montoya.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alicia.
Go ahead.
Good morning, council member, and good morning, committee. For the record, my name is Alicia Montoya. I am the Housing and Community Development Manager under Housing and Community Services. We are providing you with an update on our home ARP funds. I just want to know that this is an update only, and it does not need to go, it doesn't need to move forward to study session. A resolution for this is not required, so it's an update only. Just a quick intro. The city of Aurora was awarded $4.1 million in Home American Rescue Plan funds or Home ARP funds. This is a one-time allocation, and the funding was created to assist individuals or households who are experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, and other vulnerable populations. By providing affordable housing, rental assistance, supportive services, and non-congregate shelter to reduce homelessness and increase housing stability. There is a plan that defines the use of the Home ARP grant funds to address these needs within HUD-approved eligible activities. And the city of Aurora will make funds available for activities once the Home ARP allocation plan associated including public participation process and HUD approval has been completed. In order to implement that plan and community involvement, in order to receive the HUD approval, we hire Civitas, and we have a speaker presenter from Civitas that will talk about the plan, the draft plan, and the recommendations within the plan. So Spencer, if you are still online, it is all you.
Thank you. And Alicia, just Spencer, before you jump in, just to add to that, the HUD Home ARP has been consistently part of the stack of leveraged funding for the navigation campus that we're looking to create. And so this is part of the process in making that leveraged funding available. So I know council's seen us list this amount of money for about the past year. So this is just part of that overall stack of about 25 million of leveraged funding. Go ahead, Spencer. Thank you.
Thank you. And do I have permissions to share my screen? I'm not sure if I sent the PowerPoint in earlier. I'm happy to just kind of talk through that if needed, but if people wanted to follow along, I'm not sure if that's available.
You do have permission to share, but I'm happy to pull it up for you, Spencer.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and just to not delay too much of the time. I appreciate that intro. Stole some of my thunder for the intro, which is fine, but that's the bulk of this this funding will go towards this navigation center. Just want to talk about some of the processes that were involved with this. So the home ARP allocation planning process required sort of an abbreviated version of a community needs assessment. Oh, there we go. And we can just go probably to that second slide, please. So HUD required an abbreviated version of a community needs assessment, especially dealing with homelessness and at risk of homelessness. There was a big push for data analysis as well as stakeholder consultation. And as briefly mentioned earlier, we've completed that data analysis as well as the stakeholder consultation with all the appropriate stakeholders that HUD requires for this plan. As mentioned, $4.1 million, a little over that, going to the city for this one-time allocation. Next slide, please. So before we discuss some of the eligible activities under this plan, I wanted to just sort of highlight what's being called as the qualifying populations. This is within the CPD notice of who these funds can serve. So the first three we're all very familiar with: homeless, at risk of homelessness, and those that are maybe fleeing domestic violence or human trafficking. The fourth category is other populations. HUD had sort of a twofold definition for this. One of those definitions is those who previously were homeless and are now housed but need continued assistance. And the second definition is for other populations that are at the severe cost burden level and making below 30% area median income. So again, the people that fall under this category are oftentimes the same people that would fall under number 2, but HUD does require that this is documented for receiving these funds. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously, these are the 4 eligible activities that can be used for this funding. And for those of you who may be familiar with the typical home program, some of these are very much the same as that program, but the other 2 are sort of blended in from the Emergency Solutions Program. So affordable rental housing development, non-congregate shelter development, tenant-based rental assistance, and supportive services. And I'll dive just briefly into each of those. Next slide, please. And some of the eligible uses. So for rental housing development, these are some of the eligible costs that can be associated with this. So acquisition, construction costs, of course, rehabilitation of rental housing, if there are ways to sort of preserve some of the affordable housing that's out there. The eligible costs, development hard and soft costs, relocation expenses, and some of the operating costs for assistance and reserves. Next. For the non-congregate shelter development, again, very similar with acquisition, new construction, and rehab, all eligible for these funds. The eligible cost, development hard soft cost, acquisition, very, very similar to the rental development cost. The big consideration, though, is really what I have on the bottom. The ongoing operating cost of NCS cannot be paid for with home ARP funds. So these home ARP funds, and as we'll get to the final slide, is we see that the bulk of this allocation is going towards non-congregate shelter development. And thankfully, with the leveraged funding that's going there, that should not be a problem to allocate these specifically for the development of the NCS and let the operating funds come from a different source. Next. Home ARP, tenant-based rental assistance, as this is pretty familiar with the home program. So again, rental assistance, utility costs, security deposits, etc. The big difference between this program and the regular home program is that the tenants can receive up to 100% of rent and utility cost. And that, again, tenant-based being that the assistance is tied to the tenant, not to the household, not to the location specifically. And next. Supportive services is really categorized into 3 categories. It's direct homeless supportive services, homeless prevention, and housing counseling. And we'll just briefly go over some of the eligible costs for that on the next 2 slides. We can go next, please. So for homeless supportive services and homeless prevention services, these are very familiar if you've worked with any of the McKinney-Vento supportive services. Well, these are just the basics that these people need to get back on their feet. So it could be anything from outreach services, mental health services, to childcare and food and case management. So a big, vast net for the supportive services that these populations are often in need of. Next. And housing counseling is really going towards the staff that can provide these services for these persons. The one key note that we point out here is that with these allocation funds, housing counseling is only for sort of rental and just sort of life skills that you need with housing. In other words, it cannot go towards home purchase or first-time home buyer assistance or counseling. Next. And these are just a few of the stakeholder highlights from a survey. So we did a various means of reaching out to stakeholders for either interviews or surveys or a combination of the two. So when it came to ranking some of the unmet housing and service needs among the qualifying populations, again, qualifying populations being homeless or at risk, these are sort of the layout of how these ranked with some of the rental, lack of rental housing is definitely noted within the community, and supportive services sort of divvied up among there as well. I think what we all recognize, not only in your city, but just nationwide, that it's very tough. All of these categories are needs of the population that's at risk, but to divide up the limited funds also becomes a little bit difficult. We'll go next slide, please. So when it came to ranking the use of the funds, very much evenly distributed amongst the four eligible activities, but this is sort of how it came out with the survey that we took with the stakeholders, with a high need, of course, for development, non-congregate shelter. Next. And this is the supportive services. So this is only highlighting some of the top ones that we saw, and we see substance abuse treatment very much high up there. A little surprising for the amount that the landlord-tenant liaison services receive, but this is something that is being seen in a few other communities, that there needs to be some assistance between the tenant themselves and maybe the landlord as far as trying to work through any challenges there. Mental health, homeless prevention, also very high on the list. Next. And the quick question, would the city benefit from developing a non-congregate shelter? There were 0 answers that said no. There were certainly a bulk that were unsure, perhaps need a little bit more education of what this could provide. But the bulk of the answers from the stakeholders saying absolutely yes, that the city would benefit from this non-congregate shelter. And next, please. So when this was submitted, the budget was not completely threshed out, but we have since updated that with 90% of the allocation. That's $3,734,000 and $741, excuse me. So 3.7 million going towards the development of non-congregate shelter. As mentioned previously, it'll be sort of another leveraging point for this navigation center. And 10% for admin. There is a cap of 15% for admin, so only $414,971 will go towards the admin and planning for these funds. And with that, I'll go to the next slide and open it up for potentially any questions or comments regarding that presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Councilmember Coombs, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, based on the discussions we had in passing the resolution regarding the navigation campus, it seemed like non-congregate sheltering was kind of the smaller portion of what was expected to be included, and that kind of a model similar to the Springs Rescue Mission, which includes a significant amount of congregate sheltering, was the model that folks were intent on pursuing. So I'm just confused about the definition of what we're doing there at that navigation campus as non-congregate sheltering, aside from the permanent supportive housing component and the like, you can come be in the space without accessing shelter. Everything else seemed to be more congregate sheltering oriented. So can staff clarify how this model is identified as non-congregate sheltering?
Thanks for the question, Councilmember Coombs. Yeah, the facility will probably have the full range between congregate and non-congregate. And so because this amount of funding is small in comparison to the, estimated around $55 million to build the facility, this can go to the non-congregate portion. So We did have the transitional housing, and then the way the building was structured with about 4 floors of the sheltering component rather than the transitional, the first floor being kind of that very congregate shelter kind of piece. Also space for emergency shelter, which would be people kind of in the same room. When you get to the other floors, the intent of the design would be to have people not in individual rooms, but in rooms or separated in such a way to meet the definition of non-congregate. We've seen this in some other shelters. I think the navigation piece in Houston showed this, where you maybe have a room with 2 to 4 people in a room, with then shared bathrooms and shared sort of living space, and even sort of just those shared spaces. So in meeting that definition of non-congregate, it doesn't mean that it's just one person per room, but it would not be one large room, say like we have now at the Day Resource Center on a cold weather night, where people are in one space on mats, if that helps. I think we'll have the full spectrum, probably all the way to the transitional housing, which would be the individual more unit concept.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I think that's all I have at the moment.
Okay, and just to wrap my mind, so we obviously engaged in this to get a deeper sense of how we can align, programming and anything that we might want to put these funds towards with the requirements of the pot of monies. And it sounds like we are hoping to apply the award of about just over 4 million to different parts of that proposal, the navigation campus. Is that an accurate summary? Okay. I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Okay, great. All right. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, I wish we had more money. I guess that's the only thing I would say, because I do think that I know of other work being done that like would fit squarely into this, but I know 4 million doesn't really go that far. Especially when we talk about these larger pieces of infrastructure. So thank you all for, the work and the thoroughness on this item, was much appreciated. And I'm glad to hear that this is in a good place, and it was information only, I guess. Does that mean then we will, staff will just continue to move forward with that kind of intent on trying to apply it to the proposal, and yeah, I guess since it's not coming, doesn't have to come back for a vote. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening, next steps?
Yes, so we actually have the recommendations live on our website right now, receiving customer or community feedback until March 12, I believe. Spencer, please correct me if I'm wrong. Or Sarah, I believe you're online as well.
Yeah, it's March 16th.
March 16th. Thank you. And once that date gets here, then we can make the recommendations final and move forward with allocating the funding.
And Councilmember Murillo, just to further answer your question, so this is just the plan that we submit to HUD about how we intend to use the funds. Once we are further along in the process with this project and we're actually going to expend the funds, at that point we would have an agreement with whomever, it's sort of a construction piece or however we allocate those. That agreement for actually expending the funds will come to council. So hopefully that clarifies your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. All right. And if somebody wouldn't mind just putting the link to the like public facing landing page, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I think we're good on this agenda item.
Thank you. Thank you, Spencer.
Yep,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Alicia. Alrighty, let's transition to our next agenda item, which is Councilmember Marcano is a sponsor. Unfortunately, he's not here today. It looks like this is an information only item. I don't recall if we've heard this before, and this is just coming back for additional review of changes. But I'll kick it back to staff to get the presentation along.
Good morning, Sandra Youngman, Manager of Code Enforcement, and this is actually a follow-up from an earlier Horns meeting where Councilmember Marcano wanted estimate on a pilot program regarding disturbing the peace and the noise ordinance change recommendations that he had presented in October. So I don't know if we want to continue with this or if we want to wait until he's back in April, whatever you would like to do.
Let's go ahead with the presentation now. Councilmember Marcano can review the recording and connect with you if there are any additional questions. But while we have the opportunity, let's talk about it.
Okay, so I worked with our budget office, Kristen Kalispell and Richard Griggins, and obtained some information, some costs for the services. One-time cost was about $177,000, which included the radios, the equipment, noise meters, the vehicles that were needed, body-worn camera, and uniforms. The one-time cost for staffing this, and we looked at what I looked at was having 4 additional staff working 40-hour weeks and a supervisor overseeing them to respond to the after hours or weekend calls for disturbing the peace and noise complaints. The dollar amount for as far as staffing was about $462,000, $463,000, with the total being about $640,000 for the pilot program for the year. I reached out to Division Chief Chad Lanigan with APD to talk about their community service representative program that they have in place. And we just talked about a number of issues or things that would be happening. And so basically the duty summary for the positions would be that they would respond to calls, they would monitor the 911 dispatch to listen for the noise, disturbing the peace or noise calls, to and then respond accordingly if it fell into their purview, and do all the follow-up on the research investigation if there's summonses that would be issued, and court follow-up if that would be necessary. So this is information only. He was just wanting to know the cost amount for a possible pilot program, which comes out to about $640,000. He also did ask if the radios would be able to be, if the program didn't go through, if it didn't be successful as far as the pilot, those radios would be able to be transferred over to the police in order to assimilate into their inventory. So I don't know if you have any questions. I know in talking with Division Chief Lanigan, we had some conversations regarding officer safety, et cetera, those kinds of things. He can certainly talk about, I thought maybe the community resource, the community representatives for APD may be able to handle some of these calls, and he can certainly talk about that if you'd like to hear.
Yes, go for it.
So, excuse me, Sandra and I did have some conversations about this, and thank you for including the police department in this thought process. As you know, noise complaints generally always come through the police department, and at times they become a lower priority than probably what we have going on at the city during the higher peaks. And anything that we can probably do to try to figure out how we can take care of our citizens that are experiencing noise complaints, I'm all about. I have a concern, though, just allowing our code enforcement officers after hours go into a party, a loud party where, you know, alcohol or drugs could be there without the assistance of the police department. I'm all about a co-responder model that we would do together. If they're out and about, we do that a lot right now as it is. I would be concerned just having code enforcement just showing up at people's houses in the middle of the night. under certain circumstances without one of us there. They're, as you know, they're not armed. They don't have all the same training that we do. So that's one of my concerns. Another one in the ordinance that I was reading that could get a little sticky is, you know, if one person one day shows up and says, yes, I want to file charges or I'll be a witness to this, and if they don't show up to court, then they can't be used as a witness the next time. And some of my concerns with that is there's just things that happen in life that where sometimes people don't show up to court. And then the next time there's a loud noise complaint, they can't be used. And then on top of that, how would the officers, whether code or police department in the field, even know that they can't be used as a witness? That would get iffy there. Concern I would have there. And then the defining of probable cause after the fact, just off of a video that either code enforcement or the police department might get that, hey, this is a loud noise complaint. Who do we, just off of a video, who do we issue the summons to? It can't just necessarily be the homeowner. We would have to figure out who was at the home at the time. And a lot of times, off of personal experience, we end up with, well, I don't know who was here last night. And it wasn't me. It was my cousin, you know, from across town that was at the house last night. So getting probable cause just out of a video recording for loud or unnecessary noise would be very hard to get probable cause out of. Like, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it would be way more difficult. And those are just some of the concerns I have. I like our current setup with code enforcement the way it is now. I just would hate to ever put them in a position, especially sometimes with noise complaints over my career. Those have been sometimes the most contentious calls that we go on, trying to get cooperation from a group of unruly people. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions about that.
I was hoping you could circle back on the witness bit about not showing up the first time and not being able to be a witness moving forward. Can you talk a little bit more about expand on that?
Well, in the ordinance says any witness who fails to testify at a trial on an unreasonably loud or unnecessarily loud noise complaint shall not be considered as a witness willing to testify at trial for any subsequent unreasonably loud or unnecessarily loud noise complaints. I get it. I get what we're trying to do is, hey, if you don't show up to court, we're not going to ever use you again. But my worry would be that what if something happened and they couldn't show up to court for whatever reason, and then it circles around a couple days later and now we can't use them, on top of the fact that we wouldn't ever know out in the field that they didn't show up to court. So it's going to be kind of a catch-22 if they didn't show up to court and then they call the next day and then the courts are going to say, well, no, you didn't show up the first time. We got to dismiss this case because of the ordinance. We out in the field we wouldn't know they didn't show up to court. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and there's not a way that communicate, like that sounds like a communication. Maybe there's something deeper, but is it really just truly just being able to communicate that, or is there a deeper issue there?
We have no communication with the courts. The officers, code enforcement officers on the street, and Sandra, you can correct me if I'm wrong if your people have information that I don't, but our officers on the street would have no information that a witness did not show up to court and they could not be used for a subsequent noise violation. We don't have a system set up for that.
For code, possibly if we attend all of our arraignments for our cases, and if it was a noise complaint, we may have an officer in place for that, depending on which court it ends up going into. So we may know, but that's if we're responding. I don't know how that would be related to PD at a later time if they're responding to a separate case out there.
it would be the same way unless an officer actually went to court and they didn't show up. But most of these are all taken care of without an officer even in the courtroom, most of these cases.
Okay. Okay, so we just don't have that infrastructure or process set up to be able to have that like real-time information.
Yes, Councilmember, you're correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilmember Coombs, do you have any questions or comments?
I do not. Thank you for the presentation.
This is an informational only, so I'm not sure exactly what the next step should be. If we're going to wait for Councilmember Marcano to review the notes, etc.
Yeah, just because the timing with the lobbying trip and him being the sponsor, I definitely wanted him to have an opportunity to follow up with you, Sandra, and you, Jad. You guys raised some great points, and you know, I appreciate the seriousness in kind of analyzing the feasibility of something like this. And I think that he will have an opportunity to review and circle back with you both and decide if he wants to move that forward, if there's a way for him to resolve some of the concerns that were shared, right? I think that's probably best done before moving that forward, but I'll leave it up to him to figure out how to navigate that. So since it's information only, we won't make a recommendation on that.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. All right, that concludes the agenda, the business portion of our agenda. Any miscellaneous matters for consideration, updates from community? I don't see any attendees, but I do see a lot of staff on the call.
Councilor Murillo, I just was gonna let Joseph D. Herrera, our Youth Violence Prevention Manager, mention an update about the notice of funding for the youth violence grants, if that's okay. Just a 1-minute update.
Yep.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, council members. So yes, we do have our NOFO grants going live Monday morning, which is very exciting. They'll be live from March 6th through March 31st, and we'll be sure to get that information over the link and all of that to all of council, so you can all share that with your networks as appropriate. And just an update on staffing, we did have my data analyst started with us on Monday, so he's already hit the ground running with digging into data with school districts, with the police department, and really has some wonderful ideas on how we can really best capture the data that we're needing and what we can do with that data as we capture it. So his name is Austin Burdett. So he has joined us as of Monday and has already hit the ground running. So if you have any questions in regards to the NOFO grants, please let me know. Otherwise, that's what we have going on in youth violence.
Thank you, Joseph, for that update. Any other announcements and updates? Feel free to just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, council member. I just wanted to update everyone that our Dream Big Bronco Youth Funding surveys went out about 10 days ago. And Rachel Whipple, who is leading this effort for our community engagement team, has shared there's been already over 110 survey results. And again, what the team is doing is they're going out and they are surveying community groups, preschools, rec centers, schools, basically anywhere that you have families and kids. Over the next month, the team of Rachel, Scott, and John are going to be going out and asking people where they would like to see the money being used in our community. So I just wanted to let you know that's live, it's out there, it's on all our social media sites, and we're getting some really great responses. So thank you.
Great, thank you for that update. Any other updates? Alrighty, looks like there are none, so we will go ahead and adjourn, and I will see you all next month on April 6th for our next meeting. Have a good rest of
you.
the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.